rises. The Rings of Power stars pull back curtains on the series' mythical island kingdom, and I was excited for Númenor. To be honest, I was really excited to see it until we got the promotional material, and I don't feel it. Seriously. I mean, this is the main two families, or main two factions, or whatever you want to call it, for Numenor. And I mean, do these guys look like Numenorians to you? I mean, not to me, really, they don't. I mean, Cameron, who is on the far left, looks like an Anglo Saxon nobleman. Um, Miriel, who is standing to the right of him, she looks like an, I mean, ancient Greek or ancient Roman noblewoman. Arpharazon, who is there to the right of her, he looks like a Greek king or something. Isildur looks like just another warrior. It's not really any distinct costume. He's just wearing like a medieval or early modern tunic with a cuirass. Erin, who is standing to the right of Elendil, she looks also just like a Roman woman, and Isildur looks like a peasant. So this doesn't really scream Numenor or Lord of the Rings to me. This could have been from Game of Thrones. This could have been from any other series. This could be from a historical drama, um, for all we know. But it's not really something. If you would just put it out of context, this picture, would you say that this is Lord of the Rings? I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. Of course, there's a certain bias because of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but that also has set expectations for Amazon because they have a larger budget for season one than the movies had in total for all three, for 9 hours of footage and 10 hours if you count the extended editions. So, I mean, people expected more of it, more of the costumes, more of the sets, more of the effects and all that, and it just isn't represented in this Numenor. So, in the article, it says, of course, that The Rings of Power is a series that features many intriguing storytelling prospects, but perhaps none loom larger in the minds of Tolkien fans than the story of Numenor. And of course, the story of Numenor is one of the main stories in the Second Age, um, and it's a story that spans over several thousand years, with around 2000 of the Second Age. You really see for the first time this clear, outspoken, um, outspoken narrative against the ban of the Valar. So, which meant that they couldn't go sailing west to Valinor. There were elves from Tol Eressëa, which is on the eastern coast of Valinor, who sailed to Numenor, but not Numenorians who sailed west. So that is one thing. So it's a really interesting story because it also tells, the story of the corruption of a people, of people becoming more prideful, more resentful of their elven friends, of their human kin, so that they start to enslave their fellow humans. It's a really interesting story, but because it's condensed, it already has major problems, and this is also shown in this article. So, in the Second Age, where the Rings of Power picks up that story thousands of years before Frodo picks up the One Ring, Numenor is still a gleaming, powerful sovereignty, greatest of the realms of men, where its citizens use their elven heritage and knowledge to build a world superpower. And yes, of course, they have elven heritage. Um, well, some at least do, because Elros was the brother of Elrond, also the two half-elven siblings. And Elros chose for mortality, while Elrond chose for immortality and for being an elf and remaining an elf. Um, so they do have elven heritage, at least the nobility, but they don't use it at this point to build a world superpower because they also have the heritage of the Edain, of the three houses of men, or the three main houses of men who fought against Morgoth. So they already had their own culture. So it's not only elven heritage um, that is used to build a world superpower. It's the combination of these two, of these two cultures that enables them to build this superpower. But they're more human than elves, because it's the houses of men that settle Númenor with Elros as their first king. Um, so elven heritage is only in the line of kings, basically. Maybe some elves also lived there and also had children there, but that's not really specified in Tolkien. So we don't know that as well. Um, but all is not as it seems. Even before the Númenorian culture meets its ultimate doom, there are major ideological battles to be fought between the powerful leaders of the island kingdom. At the time of the Rings of Power, two major factions are vying for control over Númenor's future as the leadership faces a choice between embracing heritage or embracing progress. Neither of those two things were played a part in the downfall of Numenor. It wasn't embracing heritage that kept the faithful from sailing west. It was their, you know, loyalty to the ban of the Valar. So they keep their promises. They're an honest people. They keep contact with the elves, um, because they still feel, connect. They are elf friends, so they're friendly with the elves. And has nothing to do with embracing heritage. It's maybe more tradition, uh, but they don't embrace it for the faithful. It's always been this way, and it remains this way. So um, there might be persons who change their mind because eventually the king's men, they gain the upper hand and they become the most powerful faction on the island. So a lot of the faithful changed their minds and also vied for immortality and wanted to go sailing west. So I mean, there is this internal strife as well within the faithful, but not anymore really at the end of the Second Age, because I mean the faithful are basically gathered up in Romana, in the eastern seaport of Númenor, the main eastern seaport of Númenor, where the king's men can keep watch over them. So they're basically in a ghetto at this point, and they don't really have that much freedom anymore to go roaming around the island. They lost their city in the west of Numenor, Andunia, so they all had to leave that. And the king's men don't want to embrace progress. They want to embrace power. They want to go against the Valar. They want immortality. They are prideful. It's not nothing to do with progress. It has to do with envy, with jealousy. That's what the king's men are about. So when we see the island kingdom of Numenor, we see a perceived unity, which shouldn't be there because at the time um, our Pharazôn was in open rebellion um, when the father of Miriel, Tar Palantir, died. So it's because of this rebellion that he also, and because of the higher numbers of king's men, that he could take the throne from Miriel, because she was the rightful heir, but he just took the throne and he married her against her will. It's a tragic story for Miriel, but there was no perceived unity. There was the king's men, and there was the faithful, and there was clear animosity between the two. So Gravel says that we see it as a masterclass in social cohesion, but I think there is an emotional disconnect at its center. There is a schism between the faithful, who want to remember and celebrate their elvish connections and roots, and the king's men, of which Pharazôn is one. So not all of the faithful were elves or had elven heritage or elven connections. They just kept faithful to their word and faithful to their beliefs and their friendship to the elves, and their respect for the Valar and their awe for the Valar. So that's why they're faithful. Um, and I think the series doesn't really understand this because they also have to condense this these thousands of years of um, of heritage of about 1,500 years of um, a decline in morality basically um, in Numenor. But I mean, they condense it in such a way that it won't be shown, so we will see this perceived unity and then probably suddenly a rebellion or something. I don't know. I don't really have high hopes for it, and um, I don't think that this serves the story. I think it should have been better if it was set at the end of the rule of Tar-Palantir, um, and that Pharazôn was in open rebellion already, so you won't see this perceived unity. You would see rebellion and strife and war, a civil war in Numenor. I think that would have been more interesting than just now having like an ideological battle, um, which at this point it wasn't. It was full on rebellion. Um, so the King's Men want to be a little bit more innovative and I guess take it in a direction where they celebrate themselves and don't need to look at themselves as second class citizens, but there were mostly men living on Numenor, and at this point there were no more elves, they had all left Numenor. And the Druidine also left Numenor, so there were only men with a longer lifespan who lived on the island, so they couldn't see themselves as second class citizens because they were the only citizens. But because of their pride or their you know they live longer, and the king's men develop something of like a hatred or something for the middlemen and started to enslave them and rob or plunder towns and cities and villages and um, basically cutting down forests and exploiting the land. Basically they were a colonial power at this point. So it wasn't. It hadn't anything to do with innovation. As I said before, it has everything to do with envy, with pride. Um, so, because I think that's probably what you would do if you were celebrating Elvish culture, you'd be asking yourself the question, oh, what am I doing here and why can't I live forever? But they weren't really celebrating Elvish culture, they were friendly with the elves in the beginning and had trade relations with the elves and had respect for the Eldar. Um, they were more celebrating the Valar if they were celebrating anything because they worshipped the Valar. They worshipped Eru, Ilúvatar, the supreme god of the universe. So not really Elvish culture. They would have had their own architecture, their own culture, the cultural influences of the three houses of men merging together as one, with some bit of Elvish architecture and bits of Elvish. The Elvish language was important, so there are parts of Elvish culture present, but I don't think that is was the defining factor of Numenor, Elvish culture. Not really. It's a culture of humans. So uh, that they also say in this article that Numenor was founded by half-elven leaders. Not really. Actually, it's only Elros, as I said, because there were only two half-elven at this point. It was uh, it was yeah, Elros and Elrond. And Elrond chose to remain an elf, and Elros chose mortality and became the first king of Numenor. Um, so, certain bloodlines for old Numenor have exceedingly long mortal lives because of their ties to the city's founder. City? I mean, it's a kingdom. It's not just one city. So, they're going to make it one city, and no, that's really bad. Um, it's a kingdom. It's not one city, and yeah, it's not Atlantis, and they go down to it in this further down in the article. They compare it to Atlantis, but it isn't. It was inspired by Atlantis, but it was a kingdom with several cities. So yeah, this is a problem as well. They don't know the lore. Um, the screenwriters of the Rings of Power. Sitting at the top of it all is Miriel, the current Queen Regent of Númenor, who must navigate the ideological divide with Pharazôn's help. Um, no, well, she shouldn't be sitting at the top because she was never queen. And it is also stated in the appendices, uh, to which they have the right, but clearly chose to ignore what's in them because it literally says that Tarmiriel should have been the rightful queen, but after the death of Tar-Palantir or Pharazôn, the leader of this rebellion of the Kingsmen, he took the throne. He usurped the throne before she could be inaugurated as queen. So she shouldn't be sitting there. The actress says she is sort of navigating between essentially two ideas: idea of maintaining tradition and adhering to tradition, specifically the sort of elven tradition and Numenorean ancestry, and the idea of progress, modernization, moving forward and leaving the old ways behind. Leaving the old ways behind, that is what the Kingsmen wanted to do, but more in the sense of, taking land because they felt superior to other men. They could take all the land they wanted in Middle Earth if they actually set their minds to it. Because they set their minds um, to taking Valinor to battle the Valar, which is incredibly foolish. But of course, they were coaxed into that by Sauron. Um, so it's not really that much of moving forward. It's more like moving against the Valar and moving against the elves. So, though there are many figures, both new and established in Tolkien lore, who will help determine the island's final fate, the focus of Rings of Power will be especially tight on a very familiar family to anyone who knows the story of the One Ring. Though they will eventually become kings of human realms in Middle-earth itself, Elendil and his son Isildur enter the Rings of Power as a family of great seafarers whose own internal allegiances are shifting as their homeland's own divisions become more clear. We don't have much information about Isildur and Elendil during this time of rebellion, where they stood, if they had any internal divides in the family, but it's clear that they were faithful and they came together and sailed away on 9 ships during the downfall of Númenor and during the sinking of Númenor. Um, so if there were internal divisions, which I highly doubt, to be fair, they would have been resolved by then. It is a Tolkienian theme that comes out, the battle between his head and his heart, which is a nice sentiment. For Landil, his heart is elvish, his heart is connected to the faithful, but his head realizes that pragmatically and practically the safest place to be is in Númenor. For the faithful, it wouldn't be Númenor. It would it would be any place but Númenor, because they were kept like animals in a cage in Romana. They were hoarded there together and watched over by the Kingsmen. So the safest place wouldn't be Numenor. It would be an elvish realm. It would be Linden. It would be, not Eregion, because it was completely devastated at this point. You could go to Imladris, to Lothlorien. Those were safer places for the faithful than Numenor. Um, so uh, I don't think that they understand it. That they understand what the faithful and the Kingsmen were all about. It's not nothing between for progress or innovation or nationalism. Well, for the Kingsmen, nationalism may be the word for it, um, but it was more like this extremism, seeing themselves as the higher power, which was still um, present in Gondor. It, it's something that instigated the Kinstrife in the Third Age, where a part of where South Gondor was lost, where Umbar was lost um, to Gondor, um, because the king of Gondor wanted to marry, um, this a normal woman, or at least the steward of Gondor, um, but it was like they didn't want it, and then a part of the nobility was like, "Why are you marrying this normal middle woman? We're descendants of Númenor. We're pure blood Númenorians. Um, we don't want that, and that was, the start of the kin strife, and then of course you get this divide of Gondor. So it plays a part later on. So nationalism, yeah, sure. Um, that's one thing you could see in it. To deepen the stakes of Elendil's family, the Rings of Power has also added a brand new character to the group in the form of Erin, Isildur's younger sister, an aspiring architect with her own ideas about how the kingdom's future should look. Um, Emma Horvath said, Anarion, Elendil's other son, has run away to the other side of the island, and her oldest brother Isildur is kind of toying with that idea. Um, as they were kept in Romana, I don't think Anarion would have the chance to go off to the other side of the island. Um, but yeah, since they are probably only showing one city um, instead of a kingdom, yeah, running off to the other side of the island would mean like no cities, no other towns. We'll have to see it in the show how Numenor will look, but I fear for the island. Um, so she's the one sort of tasked with being the mom and trying to keep everyone together. I mean, why can't Elendil do that? He is the patriarch of the family, and Emma Horvath or Erin is a original character, so she doesn't exist in the lore. Um, and why can't a single father keep his family together? Um, I think it's really useless to add a female character in this family. I mean, it's not needed. Um, so we'll have to see how it plays out. But I really think this is another useless character, to be fair. And about Isildur, it's he's a young sailor who is a bit at a crossroad, confused, wants to follow his father's footsteps and become a ship's captain, but also wants to do his own thing and travel and explore and find himself, find his voice. I wanted to make him as relatable as possible and as human as possible because he does make a lot of mistakes along the way, and I think you could see yourself in him. So it's basically a coming of age story for Isildur. So not really that interesting, but we'll see. Though we haven't met them in the first two episodes of the series, these characters and more will breathe life into Numenor in a way the fans have never seen before, but they aren't the only major characters adding depth to the Rings of Power. There's also the character of Numenor itself, an island kingdom that was built using numerous very detailed practical elements to the delight of the cast, and that is great that they actually built a set with details. I can fully support that. Seriously, we've seen it with a lot of the Rings trilogy on how great it was with these miniatures, with these miniatures, um, and with these real life sets that you could actually portray the feeling. So I think this will feel more real than some of the other sets we've seen, which is nice. Um, so you're talking about depicting a kingdom that's at the peak of its power and wealth, so that needs to be obviously come across in the production design, in the sets, and in the costumes. But here you see the costumes, you see an overview of the costumes, in the Royal Hall of Numenor. And as I've said at the beginning of the video, these costumes look really like something you could expect in a historical drama. It's nothing really that screams to me like this is Numenorian. I mean, they're wearing little hats or these caps. They're wearing Roman style clothes, which are really distinct. Some have like this, I mean, a more Eastern vibe to it, I guess, with like these bands, colored bands that cross the body or across the clothing. Um, they are more colorful, but it's not really something distinctly Numenorian that I would say. It's if you would place this in, for example, in 300, I mean, people would feel like it fits in there as well. I think a bad historical movie with bad costumes, with historical inaccuracy, we see that time and time again. So why not? It would fit in there. And then, of course, we get this reference to Atlantis. So, this is Tolkien's Atlantis, but it's also the Greek Empire at its peak, it's the Roman Empire at its peak, it's Byzantium, it's Santorini, it's all of those things. And to step into that has been absolutely fantastic. In fact, my first scene away from the set was on a beach, and JD Payne said to me at the time, "Do you realize this is the first time we're establishing the physical geography of Numenor? What a privilege that was to be on that beach riding a horse and then saying, this is the island of Numenor." It was a great moment, and I can believe that is a great moment. Um, I have no doubts that he found it a great moment, but I don't think it's fair um, to assume that Numenor is. I mean, it's inspired clearly by Atlantis, and maybe Rome at its power, maybe the Greek Empire at its power, uh, which they mean, of course, Alexander the Great, his empire that only lasted as long as he lived. It's Byzantium, so the Eastern Roman Empire. It's Santorini, which was part of the Minoan civilization. Um, so I think it's clear that Tolkien drew some of his inspirations from from these cultures, but it's not because he draws inspiration from it that it is that of which he took his inspiration. It isn't the Greek Empire at its peak. It isn't the Roman Empire at its peak. It isn't Atlantis. It isn't Byzantium. It isn't Santorini. It is Numenor. And though elements may be present, it is Numenor. It's distinctly Numenor. Um, so that is one of the problems, that they can't really seem to separate inspiration from the writing, from what eventually was written down. Like, they can't apparently read the appendices on what is said about Numenor, and they apparently also can't work with a condensed timeline um, to bring the story to life. And I mean, Numenor is one of my favorite things in Tolkien's world, um, and to see it condensed in such a way, in such a bad way, it really makes me sad. And I don't have high hopes for it. I will watch a third episode, so look out for that review coming later this week, obviously. Um, but I'll try to be objective, but I have difficulties already. But I'll try to keep it objective, and try to see it within the story. I hope it works out, but with everything we've seen from the series so far, um, I doubt it. So let me know in the comments below what you think about it, and see you in the next one.